Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something really fascinating. We are enthusiastically peeling back the layers of a complex, highly strategic, and honestly often misunderstood geopolitical doctrine. We're going to be relying on a researcher's deep dive into some original historical and religious texts to explore a concept that fundamentally challenges how we analyze global communications. So, get ready, because we're about to view international affairs through a completely different lens. Let's kick things off with a bit of a geopolitical mystery. We have to ask ourselves, why in the world would terrorist groups with identical end goals utilize wildly different communication strategies when they were addressing the West? Well, according to the source material, the answer actually lies in an ancient doctrine, one that reveals a profound disconnect in how different cultures view deception, warfare, and even survival.
Section 1. Discovering the Deception Doctrine.
So picture this. It's around 2005, and the researcher first stumbles upon this concept while working at the Library of Congress. Because they had direct access to the stacks, they were actually translating original Arabic writings from major figures like Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri. This intense deep dive into primary texts eventually led to an essay for Jane's Islamic Affairs Analyst, which is an analytical journal for the intelligence and military community. And wow, it caused quite a controversy at the time. Ultimately, this whole journey of research culminated in a 2009 testimony before the U.S. House Armed Services Committee, focusing on strategies for confronting extremist ideologies.
All right, let's dive into exactly what they found. The core concept uncovered in those texts is called Taqiyya. The source defines Taqiyya as essentially an umbrella term for a strategically sanctioned license to lie. And what emerged from reading those original Arabic texts was that al-Qaeda wasn't just talking about this doctrine in theory. No, they were actively weaponizing it in their geopolitical strategy. This wasn't just some fringe theological idea, but a very practical, applied tactic for engaging with adversaries on the world stage.
Section 2. Al-Qaeda versus ISIS. You can really see this tactical divide play out when you look at their public messaging. As the research notes, al-Qaeda essentially fed the West a grievance mantra. They push this narrative of, hey, we attacked you because you attacked us, leave us alone, and we'll leave you alone. It was packaged as a standard geopolitical conflict, perfectly tailored for Western politicians and media to easily digest. On the flip side, ISIS operated with what the source calls a harsh, refreshing honesty. In a manifesto literally titled Why We Fight You, ISIS openly stated their #1 reason for fighting the West was simply because the West is comprised of infidels. They didn't even bother masking their theological motivations.
But here is where the research gets incredibly revealing. When you look at al-Qaeda's internal communications, the communiques written in Arabic specifically for fellow Muslims, that whole grievance mantra completely disappeared. Internally, al-Qaeda admitted their Western-facing grievances were pure deception. It was just a strategic part of warfare designed to confuse and placate their enemies. Behind closed doors, their rhetoric sounded exactly like ISIS, firmly rooted in ideological warfare rather than reciprocal political grievances.
Section 3. The Shia Survival Strategy.
Now, to fully grasp where this doctrine comes from, we have to look at the historical power dynamic. The source points out that critics will often dismiss Taqiyya by arguing it's purely a Shia thing, effectively isolating it to a tiny minority. And looking at the numbers, globally, Sunni Muslims make up roughly 90% of the Muslim world, while Shia Muslims make up the remaining 10%. But as we'll see, there is a highly specific historical reason why Taqiyya became so heavily associated with that 10% minority over the centuries.
Because the Shia were this vastly outnumbered minority, and historically hunted as heretics by the Sunni majority, they literally had to adapt to survive. The transcript explains that the Shia essentially perfected the art of Taqiyya over centuries, weaving it tightly into their cultural survival toolkit. They would act exactly like Sunnis 24/7. They were praying like Sunnis, following Sunni formulations outwardly, and participating in public life seamlessly. All the while, they fiercely hid their true Shia beliefs internally to avoid being killed. This daily performance was a fully sanctioned mechanism for preserving both their faith and their lives. Section 4. The Western Projection Problem. So if this doctrine is so deeply embedded in history, you might be wondering, why does it continually catch the West off guard? Well, the research points to a fascinating psychological disconnect called Western projection. This is the assumption that people of other faiths operate with a similar Christian consciousness. Basically, the Western expectation is that a true, deeply religious believer would naturally rather face physical torture and death than publicly lie or renounce the religion, even if that deception could save their life.
And the speaker grounds this Western assumption in a continuous, unbroken history of Christian martyrdom. Think about it. This dates back to the early Roman era where Christians repeatedly refused to renounce Christ under threat from emperors like Nero, often choosing the Colosseum over deception. It continues through the 9th century with the 42 Byzantine martyrs of Amorium, who were beheaded at the Euphrates. And it extends all the way into modern times, heavily highlighted by that tragic 2015 video of the 21 Copts in Libya who were killed for refusing to renounce their faith at the edge of a sword.
And get this. The source even notes that surviving through deception was historically heavily penalized in the West. During the Donatist controversy, around the time of St. Augustine, Christians who faked paganism just to survive Roman persecution were heavily shunned by the church once the danger actually passed. Clergymen who lied about their faith were viewed as spiritually tainted and rejected from administering the Eucharist. This history really proves that deceptive survival was never viewed as a point of cultural pride in the West. It was a source of profound shame.
So the crucial point we're looking at here is a stark theological contrast. While the Western Christian tradition glorifies resisting unto death and views religious deception as shameful, historical texts show a completely different framework in Islam. The transcript states that Muhammad actually approved of his followers publicly denouncing him. This was officially sanctioned both to save their own lives in highly dangerous situations and as a legitimate military tactic against infidels. It is just a fundamentally different foundational approach to truth, honor, and survival in the face of conflict.
Section 5. Modern-day adaptations. Let's bring this back to the present day. Applying this ancient doctrine to modern times reveals a really fascinating demographic flip. Earlier, we explored how the Shia perfected Taqiyya because they were a vulnerable minority living amongst a Sunni majority, right? Well, today, the demographic reality has completely inverted in certain parts of the world. Sunnis now find themselves as the minority population living within modern Western nations.
Based on these historical texts and survival tactics, the research draws a pretty striking conclusion here. Modern Sunnis living in the West as a minority have the exact same historical and doctrinal justification to utilize Taqiyya, just as the Shia did centuries ago. This theological framework provides a sanctioned method to conceal true beliefs and strategic intentions while surrounded by an outnumbering, culturally different population.
So I want to leave you with this provocative thought from the research. If this doctrinally sanctioned deception, this literal license to lie, is actively in play today, how drastically must we adjust our lens? When we listen to global geopolitical communications, extremist messaging, or even diplomatic overtures, are we just projecting our own cultural expectations onto words that are fundamentally designed to deceive us? It's a really powerful question that challenges everything we think we know about global strategy. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a lot to think about, and I will see you in the next one.